Hey, hey!
Hey!
How are you?
Super good. How about you?
Good. Doing great.
Good. What are we talking about today?
Hey, so I thought we would probably talk about winter gardening. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds lovely because it's an area that I don't know much about. Really, the only things that I've learned about winter gardening are from you
Uh-huh.
and from this guy on YouTube
Uh-huh.
who's really into sustainability and permaculture, and he talks about winter gardening. I guess in third person. Um, I don't know much about him. I own a book by him. His name is Caleb Warnock, but
Right.
I've seen a couple of things that he's put out, probably in his books, maybe online, but very limited. But I know it's a thing, so I know there's enough
Yeah.
out there that I'm interested in it. I just don't know much about it, and it feels really overwhelming. So I think
Yeah.
this would be a cool
Well,
topic.
quite honestly, I don't know a lot about it either from personal experience. I've dabbled in it and it's tricky, but definitely doable. It's
Cool.
actually a topic that I don't think a lot of people know about.
I don't hear anybody talking about it.
People don't really think about it much because they get to the end of the fall and they're like,
I'm done.
well, goes the growing season, right? And
Great.
you don't really think that you can grow things in the winter or fall.
Right. They like closed the door on that opportunity. I didn't even know fall gardening was a thing until I started gardening a couple years ago, and I'm like, what? Who knew that there was like plants that love growing in the fall, like Brussels sprouts and cabbage, and
Right.
like I had no idea. That makes me
Yeah.
want to go gardening, and then I went into winter gardening. Like I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's a fascinating topic for sure. I would say so. One person explained it in something that I was reading, and they said so a lot of people don't want to do winter or fall gardening because they're tired of the garden
Sure.
at that point. And they said, but the beautiful thing about it is that it's pretty hands off. You don't have to do a lot of work at that point. It's more just like the plants go into dormancy and you're just protecting them.
Okay.
And so they say you can have your rest and eat it too.
I love that, right? Because like that's the cool thing I love about winter gardening from the three sources that I mentioned. And I should say like Justin Rhodes is the guy that I watch on YouTube. He's phenomenal. He just does vlogs every day of his farm life and their homesteading life. But yeah, it's super cool. Like I've seen all these people do videos of like I remember Caleb Warnock specifically doing he was showing cold frames. Yes. And I think he had lettuce growing in one of his cold frames, and that blew my mind. I'm like, lettuce and greens and spinach and stuff in the middle of winter. And he went and like there was like this much snow on top of his little. And if you don't know what a cold frame is, either go Google it. We'll explain it in just a second. A cold frame is like, I don't know, it's a little box that you create with like a glass top on the top, like a window and whatever, that you can open and close, and it kind of creates a little sheltered like greenhouse environment for the plant during the winter. So like Laura said, you're just
like a mini greenhouse,
winter style, just right on the ground on top of your plants. I've also seen like PVC hoop pipes that then you put like a cover over like long rows and stuff, and that's another way to protect your plants that I've seen on YouTube as well. And in the YouTube videos from Justin Rhodes, he had like a whole row of kale growing in the middle of the winter, and I was like, what? And he's like kind of like being self-sufficient for a year. Like they know how to grow kale's pretty easy to grow in general. Once it's growing, then you can protect it through the winter. Like they just had lettuce and kale growing all year long, and I'm like, that is amazing for like your health and vitality, like having fresh greens throughout the winter. Like so cool.
Crazy, huh?
So crazy.
So some key points about winter gardening is I'm going to show you a book in just a second, but it's called The 4-Season Harvest. And he talks about that it's not that the plants are growing all winter, because you're not growing anything. You're harvesting all winter.
Oh.
So it's more about the harvest. So what he means by that is cool. You have things in your cold frames or your hoop houses that are being protected from the elements, and we'll talk about that too. But it's more about just that. So you go out and you harvest your greens from that, and you have to choose your varieties carefully.
Okay. For winter gardening.
for winter gardening, the ones that are designed to be growing in the winter time, right?
Good to know.
And then you also harvest from your stored foods. So your winter squashes that you've brought indoors, or your garlic that you've braided, and you're harvesting your apples that are in a box, and your potatoes that you've already brought in, and your carrots that you've brought in. Sure. So it's pulling from your stored foods and your overwintered foods.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
4-season harvest is what he calls it. So
I like that.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Rather than your traditional harvest of like the tomatoes and peppers.
Right.
In the middle of summer.
Right. When it's like all at once sometimes, and you're like,
yeah. And that's an interesting point, because it spreads out your harvest over the entire year, makes it a lot less all in or nothing, right? Like,
yeah. And that's a cool thing, because that like shifts your mindset. Because when I hear winter gardening, you think spring and summer gardening, where you're like planting and like, it's like you're just trying to keep up with everything. And but if it's all grown and then you're just kind of in like harvest mode for multiple months, that actually puts you in a calm, relaxed, like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, totally.
That's really cool.
It spreads out your workload over the longer period of time.
Right. So these really short, intense intervals. It's just
yeah. So obviously, when we talk about winter gardening or protecting plants, things like that, we're not going to be able to protect and have things grow over the winter if they're heat lovers. So we're not doing tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, corn,
basil,
squash, or melons. Yeah, anything that's really susceptible to freezes or like really loves the heat, you're not going to be able to grow those in the winter time. Okay. So instead, it's going to be things that grow well in the springtime. So the spring, you're also going to plant them in the fall, and then we're going to protect them from the elements. Because what will kill your plants the fastest is the elements, the wind mostly.
Okay, those freezing.
Snow actually kind of protects it from an insulation standpoint. Yeah. But it's going to be the winds, the cold winds.
Okay. That's why we have to like create hoop houses or cold frames. Okay. I didn't know that.
Right. So what you're going to do midsummer or toward the end of summer, you're going to start planting things, and you have to plant a little longer than you do in the spring, just because the days are getting shorter.
Okay.
So the plants are going to grow a lot slower. And what your goal is to have the plants full grown by the time you hit your freeze date.
Okay.
So if that means that you have grown out your carrots and you want to protect some of them in the ground for the winter time, you can throw a cold frame over the top of those, right? Okay. Or a hoop house or whatever you have. If they're not full grown, they're probably not going to survive super well in a winter garden. But so you're going to plant things that grow quickly, like, and also things that like cold weather. So carrots, beets, kale, spinach, lettuce, peas. What else? Onions. You can definitely do those over the winter.
Cool.
Any of your cold crops. So, what are some other, like cabbages but those are more like a storable item.
Okay.
You probably harvest those at the end and just keep them in cold storage.
Okay.
Rather than keep them in a cold frame.
Okay.
For 2 reasons: they take a lot of space, and they also store just fine. Cool. So anything in the cole family, so that's all of your broccoli and kale and all of those kinds of things. Broccoli is probably going to be a little trickier because it's tall, it's big.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but you can plant it in the fall as well. So again, like we said, like the goal is to have the plants full grown, and then you're going to, I think of it kind of like how we put on a jacket when the weather turns cold.
Yep.
You're going to want to put on a layer of protection for your plants.
Okay.
When you start wearing a jacket.
Okay.
Then when you put on your winter coat, that's when you really want to protect your plants, right?
Yes.
So I would say the methods that you're going to use to protect the plants from the elements, the simplest thing to create is a cold frame. And it's a box. It's shaped, it's going to go over the top of your planting bed. If you have a raised bed, you want it to fit over the top of that. If you have rows, then make it the size of your rows. And then you want a slant to the top so that the sunlight can come hit in. And you're going to face that slant toward the south, because that's the way that the sunlight hits, right?
Yes.
So it's like a mini greenhouse that you put over the top of your garden bed.
Cool.
To protect your mostly greens is what people do in there. And I've also heard it explained that it's like a living refrigerator.
Oh,
so like
that's cool. Yeah, I like the idea.
Yeah, the other thing is it's called a low hoop house. So you're going to create out of something that's curved, a curved support system, and then you're going to put generally plastic over the top, usually clear plastic so sunlight can still get in, right?
Right.
The other thing you can do are greenhouses. And then as the guy in this book talks about, he used a combination of those systems.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you brought up greenhouses, because I was going to ask, I'm like, aren't greenhouses a way, like a formal, real, like, you know, legitimate greenhouse instead of like these ones that we're creating on top of the vegetables and stuff? Right. But yeah, I was like, what about greenhouses? Like,
yeah, a greenhouse, or you've seen those giant hoop houses. Yes. That are like a portable greenhouse. Yeah, like those are also great too.
Like a garage shed, like portable that you can create.
Yeah, a greenhouse just costs more money than to set up and is trickier to maintain than any of that. So this is the book I've been referencing. It's called 4-Season Harvest by Elliot Coleman.
Yeah, he's really well known in the garden.
He's brilliant. So that is a book that I recommend if you're interested in this topic. He lives in Maine. So that's a cool point, because like as far as the United States goes and like latitude lines, like he's further north than probably any of us, right? And he's growing food year round.
That is
awesome. What he does is he found that each system that he used on his plants created 10 to 20 degrees of protection. So if you normally go down to 10-degree weather, then adding a cold frame is going to bring it up to 20 to 30 degrees at your lowest point, right? So then you can look for plants that can survive to those temperatures. What he found is if he added a hoop house and a cold frame, that increased it even
so you're
more.
saying I think you said this a minute ago, right? But like he combined these techniques to create like a jacket. So it's like layering for us, like a jacket, long sleeve shirts, winter coat, warm mittens, like all those things for us during the winter creates more insulation.
Yeah, and it just brings up the temperature level that you can get to.
So cool.
Super cool. So that's what he's done. And same thing, like what he did is he learned about these processes and he extended his growing season in both directions. So he extended it into the fall and he extended it into the spring, so he could plant sooner and harvest later. And he just kept extending and extending and extending with his systems by combining these systems to the point that it connected all the way around, full circle.
Wow.
And now he can grow food year round.
Wow.
Which is super cool.
Wow. That is cool. If he can do it in Maine, we can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
That is so cool.
It does cost some money to create the systems to be able to put over the top of them, but yeah.
And that's what I've learned about, like, as I watch a lot of people that on YouTube specifically that are doing vlogs and they talk about homesteading or permaculture or the different principles that they're practicing.
Right.
And they all say 100% of the time, infrastructure is the most expensive thing that you're ever going to encounter or face, right? And if you don't know what that means, like if you're a city slicker, you know, like I grew up as a city slicker. I say that lovingly. If you grew up in the city and you haven't had access or exposure to these concepts or these terms, right? Like the infrastructure is like the buildings, the outposts, like the fencing, the chicken coop, like those things, the hoop houses that we're talking about today, the cold frames, like the garden beds, like all of that stuff is the infrastructure for whatever that you're working on. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of the reason that I don't grow in raised beds. I know a lot of people do, but to me, it's expense and work to set those up. So similar to these, I'd rather build a cold frame, right? So
right, just straight on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's interesting. I think so. I've only used a cold frame for like 2 years.
Okay.
I built them out of some scrap wood.
Cool.
I don't use them anymore because they kind of fell apart. And then I covered the tops of mine with like thick plastic sheeting.
Okay.
And I would say don't do that because it disintegrated in the sunlight. It broke down pretty quickly.
Oh, the plastic.
So if I were to build cold frames again, I would definitely get plexiglass or glass to put over the top to put those in there.
That's
so
good.
Yeah, if people are out there and they're wanting to build a cold frame or a hoop house to protect their plants, another interesting thing, when you start putting them on the plants in the fall, you're going to want to watch the temperatures because you can scorch them pretty quickly if you have a warm day, if there's no way to ventilate.
Right. So you have to like open it and let the air.
For about a month or a month and a half, you have to watch the temperature and make sure you're not going to scorch them with the heat because the sunlight can come in and be super intense. Yeah. And then it's trapped in there like a greenhouse or a car, right?
Right. It's like a car. When you get in, you're
so when you have hot days, you have to go out and make sure you ventilate it. So it just means open the top of the cold frame or lift up the hoop house so that it can get some airflow during the heat, and then you have to put them back down at night to be able to protect from the weather. Once you get into like cold weather and the sun's less intense, you don't have to do that.
Okay.
Same thing goes with watering. So while you're ventilating, you also need to water during those times to keep the plants happy. Okay. But again, once we get down into shorter days, less intense sun rays, more snow, things like that, you don't have to water or ventilate. You want to keep them covered the whole winter. Okay. So when there's snow on the ground, you can just go out and you don't even have to brush it off the tops of them. You can just leave it and it will do its thing. But you can just go out, lift it up, harvest what you need, and close it back up. Right?
That's cool. That's pretty simple,
it's more like a storage situation in the middle of winter. You're just keeping it in its dormant state.
That's amazing.
Right. And then in the spring, you can do the opposite. You can start planting early. Again, when it's super cold, you can plant your onions and peas and things that you can start really early and then move. But then as it gets warmer, you're going to need to ventilate and water. Okay. And when it gets really warm, then you just take the hoop houses and cold frames off, and then they can grow as normal. So.
Very interesting. One thing that's not necessarily connected into winter gardening per se, but one thing that I've noticed over the past couple of years is I think our brains just naturally flow better with spring gardening, right? It's like we start here and we move forward. Right. When it comes to fall gardening, you have to like figure out the frost dates and the freeze dates and work backwards. And you have to it is like reverse engineering things. And my brain doesn't work as naturally with that. It's just an interesting process to be aware of, right? When you're gardening and like, just as you talked about that, right? Like, this is what you have to do in the fall. This is what you have to do in the spring. And it's like, ooh, my brain struggles a little bit more the backtracking. And
mine does too, quite honestly. And I haven't been super successful with early spring or late fall gardening. Interesting. But it's something to practice and get better at. And I think you'll learn what works and what doesn't.
I think so too.
And again, like it's a skill that not a lot of people have. And so it's something to, if it's something that's interesting to you, like just try it out. And obviously some things are not going to work very well and some things will work great. So I've heard of people that have taken their, like, if you start tomatoes or peppers from seedlings, I've heard of some people that put those out in their cold frames or hoop houses to get them used to being outside while still being protected. So you can also use them that way in the springtime.
That's part of that extension process that he talks about in his book, right? Yeah,
you can plant earlier if things are in your hoop houses or cold frames.
Cool.
Or greenhouses, whatever you have. So
right. No, that's so cool.
I know. My dream, my vision someday is to have a greenhouse with cold frames in front of it. I'm like, I think that's super fun.
That sounds so good. When you make that, I'll come up and see it.
Right.
I love it.
We'll see how it goes.
No, I love that. From what I hear from our little chat today about winter gardening is, I just want to kind of sum this up, right? And then let's wrap up. But
exactly.
I feel like winter gardening, what I keep hearing us talk about is not a lot of people talk about it. So it's something that you're interested in. Learn about it, right? Like YouTube it and research it and learn what you can. Laura mentioned a really great book, right? So like get these resources, start learning about it and be proactive about it. Empower yourself to learn more about it, right? Because you're probably not going to have a lot of people around you being like, are you winter gardening right now? You know? I think that's one interesting thing to pull out of our little chat today. And the other one is really because it's a not well-known skill, like anything in life, there's a lot of nuances with it. And so I think just be really kind and compassionate with yourself and try it out and see what you can learn from it. See if it works, see if it doesn't work. Like Laura told her story of like she's done the cold frames for 2 years and she learned some interesting lessons about the plastic and her wood kind of broke apart. Like, so you may have to make some different choices based on that. You may just want to go super cheap, right? And like build it out of what you have right now. And that's totally great too, because we said infrastructure is expensive. So test it out. And just be an experiment mode with it and get curious and see what works and see what doesn't work.
For sure.
People that may have answers for you and try it out. Like, don't be afraid to fail. It's part of this learning, growing process.
Totally. And like the worst you can get is some lettuce in the wintertime, right? So.
You don't have to go to the store for that.
That is so great.
So cool. What an exciting process to like, whether you extend your growing season all year round, or if you just extend it just a little bit, or if you just learn a simple fact that you can protect your plants during the winter by putting on a coat, because you need to protect them from the elements, the wind primarily. Like, what a cool, empowering thing to learn to build into your life. And then it's not like that you're not growing all winter. Like, it's not all this excessive work. It's you've done the growing work. I mean, nature's done the growing work. You've just worked in harmony with
it's just time to harvest and enjoy.
You're just slowly harvesting and enjoying the fruits of your labor all winter.
The leaves of your labor, because that's all you get in the winter.
Your leaves. Your green leaves.
And on that note, I grow a lot of plants and seeds and I sell them on my Etsy shop. So there's a lot of varieties that are winter varieties. So specifically for lettuce, there's a lot of winter lettuces that are designed to go cold weather, right? So you can check my Etsy shop and see if there's seeds available in those categories. And you'll go to my website called carrotgal.com and click on the tab at the top called shop. And that'll take you over to my Etsy shop and you can look for winter lettuces and other things that are winter hardy.
Do you have spinaches? Like, do you have kale? Very cool.
Yep.
Very cool. You guys should go check that out. Get yourself some winter hardy vegetable or seeds that you want to play around with this winter.
Yeah.
So exciting. Thanks.
Let us know how it goes if you try winter gardening, and if you have any questions about it, we're happy to answer those in the comments or chats or anything. So
I'd love to hear your stories. Yeah. So good.
Hey, we'll see you next time.
See ya.